While it is said, "Today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation." And this is repeating verbatim the warning that he had given back in verses 7 and 8 about that Exodus generation. But now he's addressing these exact same words to the wavering Jews of Paul's own generation, and he explains what happened to that ill-fated Exodus generation. They had received such miraculous evidences of God's presence among them, signs and wonders like no other people in the history of the world would receive until the time of Christ himself. But now Paul is writing to the very Jews who had seen the amazing deeds done by Christ himself. And they're in danger of blowing it, just as their forefathers had done under Moses. The Jews of Paul's day claimed that if they had been in the days of their fathers, they would not have committed the works that their fathers did. And now they're on the razor's edge of doing the exact same thing that their ancestors had done. Because despite all the light that God had given unto their fathers, they rebelled against God and provoked him to anger, which Paul is now warning the Jews of his day not to repeat. So where did a nation that was so chosen and so favorably blessed of God, where did they go so terribly wrong? What is the catastrophe that he's warning his readers not to repeat? Well, rather than keep you in suspense about it, I'll just call your attention for a moment down to verse number 19, where it says, "They could not enter in because of unbelief." They heard God, they just didn't believe what he said. They provoked God. They were disqualified from entering the promised land that God had said he would give them. Now they would wander to death, and their children would one day enter the land that they had refused to, and would conquer the giants that they had been so terrified of. But if you know the story of the 12 men who went to spy on Canaan, then you know that 10 were bad and 2 were good. So he says in verse 16, "For some, when they had heard, did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses. Joshua and Caleb didn't rebel against going into Canaan. Moses and Aaron didn't rebel against it. And the whole generation that was under 20 years old was not held responsible for what their fathers had done." The point being that throughout the nation's entire history, there have always been a faithful remnant that followed God and what he told them to do. They were typically in the minority, and sometimes they were more in the minority than others, but they were always there. And Paul is urging the readers of his day against taking the broad road to destruction. Was the majority of the Jewish community speaking against Jesus? Well, since when has the majority been right? Take the road less traveled. March to the beat of a different drum. Don't conform to a culture in decline. The nation of Israel was headed for the judgment that Jesus himself had warned in Luke 21, verse 20. He said, "When ye shall see Jerusalem surrounded with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh." And it came in 70 AD, just a few short years after this very letter was written to them. Emperor Vespasian sent his son, General Titus, to put down the Jewish rebellion. And the Roman armies destroyed Jerusalem and burned the temple on the very same summer's day that 655 years earlier the Babylonians had burned it. Ancient eyewitness descriptions, along with archaeological evidence, confirm that the heat of the fire melted the gold on the dome of the temple, so that that melted gold ran down into the cracks between the stones. And the Roman soldiers coming in afterwards to pillage and plunder, they broke those stones apart, stone by stone, to scrape out the gold between them, unwittingly fulfilling the prophecy Jesus had made 40 years earlier. "See all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." Josephus, an eyewitness of the event, records that 1 million Jews were killed, and the 100,000 that survived were carried away into captivity, all within 40 years, within one generation of Jesus' prophecy. And Paul was warning his uncommitted Jewish brethren against sliding back into their Judaism. A judgment was looming for Israel's unbelief, And Christ was the only permanent escape that God offered them. And to those in our day who are curious about Christ, who are reluctant to face the opposition of a rising secularism, there is either a judgment coming or a revival. And every uncommitted person listening right now will ultimately become either part of the problem or part of the solution. Do not follow the mindless crowd. When have they ever been right? Do not conform to a culture in decline. Be a Joshua or a Caleb. Press through the narrow gate. Take the narrow way. Join the remnant and commit your life to Christ before it's eternally too late.